Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a true historical cold case. We're talking about a civilization that built incredible empires, inspired some of the greatest legends ever told, and then poof, they just disappeared.
So yeah, let's get right into it. We are looking at one of ancient history's biggest mysteries. What in the world happened to the Mycenaeans? I mean, these guys were a true superpower for centuries, and then gone. So what happened?
All right, before we start rounding up suspects, every good investigation starts with knowing the victim, right? So let's get a clear picture. Who exactly were the Mycenaeans?
So you gotta picture this. We're talking way before guys like Socrates or buildings like the Parthenon. This is Bronze Age Greece. A world of powerful kings living in these massive fortified palaces. And they weren't just warriors, they were super organized. They had this early form of Greek writing, Linear B, and they used it to keep track of everything, from sheep to soldiers. And get this, if you've ever read Homer's Iliad, these are the heroes he was talking about, the legendary Achaean warriors. That's them.
So they show up on the scene around 1600 BCE, and for the next 400 years, they're on top of the world. Their power just keeps growing. But then, look at that timeline. Right around 1200 BCE, it's like someone just flipped a switch. The lights go out. Palaces are burned to the ground. Their entire writing system, gone. Their huge trade network just collapses. An entire way of life just stops. Dead.
Okay, so what happened? Well, for a long time, both ancient Greeks and modern historians had a prime suspect. There was one group that always got the blame, the Dorians. You see, later on, the Greeks, and you've definitely heard of these guys, the Spartans, they basically said, yeah, those Dorians, they were our ancestors. And the story they told for generations was that their forefathers swept down into southern Greece and just took over everything from the old Mycenaean kings. It became a huge part of their identity, a real foundational myth.
So the legend gives us this really clean, simple story, right? You have the complex, bureaucratic Mycenaean world on one side, and then, boom, it gets totally wiped out and replaced by this tougher, simpler, more warlike society. It's the classic invasion story. But is it really that simple?
Well, any good detective will tell you, you can't just trust a story someone tells you hundreds of years after the fact. You have to go to the crime scene, you have to look at the physical evidence. So let's do that. Let's see what the archaeology actually says.
And here's the thing. The biggest problem with this whole invasion theory is that there's no smoking gun. I mean, we have zero reports from the time saying anything about it. No clay tablets saying, "Help, the Dorians are coming." No carvings on a wall. Nothing. The single most important piece of evidence just isn't there.
Now hold on. That doesn't mean the whole idea is made up. The case for the Dorians really stands on three legs. First, you have the Greeks themselves, centuries later, who really truly believe this happened. Second, you have the language. The Doric dialect of Greek did become the main one in the south. And third, you have all those legends about families returning and fighting for land. Maybe there's a little bit of truth buried in those myths. But when archaeologists actually start digging, the story starts to get really messy. There's no single invasion layer, a clear layer of ash and destruction everywhere that screams conquest. Instead, it's a patchwork. Some places burned down, others were just abandoned. And this is a huge one. The Mycenaeans weren't alone. Their collapse was part of a massive crisis that was hitting the entire Eastern Mediterranean at the same time. Everybody was in trouble.
And that quote right there just nails it, doesn't it? Real change usually does not happen like a single clean arrow on a map. History just isn't that neat and tidy. It's almost never a simple story of one group marching in and taking over. The truth is always more complicated.
So, if a big Dorian invasion isn't the answer, then what is? Well, today, most historians think it wasn't one single thing. They believe the Mycenaean world was hit by a perfect storm, a whole bunch of different disasters that all struck at the same time.
Okay, to get this, you have to understand how their whole society was built. They were a palace civilization. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you have the palace, and it controlled everything. The food, the trade, the army, the whole shebang. When everything's going well, the system is super efficient. But it's also incredibly fragile. If that one block at the top starts to wobble, the whole thing can come crashing down.
So let's walk through how this could happen. First, those external shocks hit. That big Mediterranean crisis messes up all the trade routes.
Suddenly, the palace can't get the copper and tin it needs. So what happens? Well, the central system starts to break down. The palace can't provide for people anymore. Its authority just dissolves. That leads to chaos inside their own borders, people fighting each other, abandoning towns. And when a big centralized power falls apart like that, what do you get? A power vacuum. And that's the opening.
All right, we've looked at the evidence, we've heard the theories. It's time for the verdict on this case.
And the verdict is, it wasn't a single killer. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The Mycenaean world's own rigid, top-down system was its biggest weakness. All those external problems pushed that fragile system right over the edge. And the Dorians, they weren't the ones who pushed it. They were the ones who showed up after it had already fallen, moving into a vacuum left by the collapse.
Now, the centuries that came next are often called the Greek Dark Age, and that's a really misleading name. It's not dark because people forgot how to think. It's dark to us as historians because the palaces that kept all the written records were gone, so our evidence gets a lot thinner. But it wasn't just an age of loss. It was an age of complete transformation.
And here is the most incredible part of the whole story. As terrible as this collapse was, it actually had to happen. Think about it. The world of classical Greece, with its city-states, the birth of democracy in Athens, philosophy, none of that could have happened under the old rigid palace system. The complete destruction of that old world was what cleared the way for something entirely new to be born in its place.
And that really leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about, doesn't it? If a civilization that was so powerful, so wealthy, so interconnected, could fall apart so completely, well, what does that say about our own complex world? It's a story from 3,000 years ago that feels very, very relevant today. Thanks for digging into this with us.